In this video, you'll learn about timeline and animation and some properties. This window down is called timeline. It's basically used for animating. Say I want to animate this object from point A to point B. I'll move it on the x-axis. I will use the move tool. So first I need to add a keyframe which saves the animation data of the location, rotation and scale. You should know this if you've used an editing software. Now press I to add a keyframe. It'll open a window, so pick the location option. Now you added a keyframe for the location. Expand the object transform to see all location keyframes for the X, Y, Z axes. I'll go now to frame 10, then move the object a bit and press I to insert a keyframe at location. By moving the pointer, you can preview the animation. This is essentially how to animate using the timeline. By the way, you can't export this animation to a game engine. You must use skeletal animation or alembic animation. This animation we did can only be used in Blender, but still the same method we used to animate the box can be used to animate the skeleton of the character, so don't worry about that, guys. Moving on to properties, but before that I need a simple object. Go to add or shift A, which is a lot faster. Notice how I have some properties at the right when I have the cylinder selected. If I select something else, like the light, the properties may change. Properties change based on the selected object. Some properties don't change though, and are available at all times. Like these ones. This one's for render properties, which you use to adjust render settings. Rendering is a general thing, so it'll be available at all times. This one is called output properties. You can find here settings related to output, like frame rate or resolution. Changing frame rate will change the playback speed. Typically, you'll use 30 FPS for animations. At the top is resolution, like 1920 by 1080, or you could change it as you like. Here you can set the start and the end frame of the video. By default, frame 1 is the start frame, and usually game animations are 150 frames long. Here's where you set the location of the rendered file. Now the file format. By default it's PNG, but if you want a video, pick FFmpeg video. Anyways, we will go through them later. We will skip view layer, it's not that important. Same for scene properties. As for world properties, I'll explain it later. The collection property is fairly new to Blender and I never used it. Now object properties. Basically this covers properties specific to an object. I selected the point light and the object properties changed. For instance, select the cylinder and under viewport display, under display as, you could change how it looks. Now you see the wireframe. Say I want a copy of this object. I could add another one and move it up. Alternatively, press Shift D to duplicate the object. So as you can see, it's a lot faster this way. You could also go to Object, then Duplicate Objects, and it'll duplicate it. But this gets pretty tedious if you want to do it hundreds of times. This is where modifiers come into play. It's kinda like programming, so instead of doing it manually, you do it automatically. So now I'll pick an array modifier, which duplicates the objects in an array manner. I will change number 1 on the x-axis to 0 and change number 0 in the z-axis to 1. This way it'll go up instead of sideways. The count option in the array represents the amount of copies of our object. If you want 20 copies, change the count to 20. This is just one modifier. Imagine what you could do with all of them. Like the bevel modifier, which smooths out hard edges. To smooth the edges even more, increase the amount of segments in the modifier settings. Much smoother. So that's the gist of modifiers. There are lots of them, so we will only cover the important ones in future episodes.